I'm back today to talk to you a little bit about the co-op board package process. What are they going to ask you for when you have to do a board package? Some of the most common things that you'll be asked for are business reference letters, personal reference letters, bank statements, retirement statements. They're going to want to see your overall financial profile, just what you did with the REVNY, but in a different format, and they usually want to see the entire statement, even those pages that are left intentionally blank. That's like one of the big mistakes a lot of people make. So those are some of the items. They're also going to want to see probably a bank reference letter. There might be some information requested about a pet, if you have a pet. Some buildings will interview pets. Some will just ask for vet records. Buildings have restrictions in terms of pets. So if the pet doesn't meet the requirements, then they could ask you if it's an emotional support animal. Then you'd have to be prepared with that paperwork if that was the case as well. There's going to be a ton of things for you to sign. A lot of it is just about the house rules. It's about making sure you know that there is or isn't an open alteration agreement from the previous owner. So a lot of it is going to be very basic signing off on things to make sure that everything is transparent to both parties. They usually like to look at your tax returns as well, so that's something else that you should expect. And just know that if there's any large deposits within the window of time that they've asked you for the bank statements, they're going to want to see a paper trail and understand where that large deposit came from. So depending on the co-op, some co-ops will go back 1 month in bank statements. Other co-ops can go back much further. The longest I've ever seen is a co-op ask for 1 year in bank statements, but that was a very unique situation because they were also requesting money to be put in escrow, which is a whole other topic. So, but for the most part, you're looking at somewhere between 3 to 4 months, and maybe for one that's a little bit more lenient, it would just be the 1 month. So just like how a mortgage lender would ask you for the paper trail of any large deposits, the co-op's going to do the same thing. And any money that is in prior to that 2-3 month window, they're going to consider to be seasoned money. And again, that's on both the co-op and the lender side. They tend to use that term. I think that's even where I learned it from. So there may be fees associated with submitting the application. They're going to run your credit. They're going to do a background check. There's going to be an application fee. There could be a move-in, a move-out fee. Some could be refundable deposits for, say, moving in or moving out. Others might not be. So again, all of these things will vary, and that's really why you need a real estate agent to be able to walk you through the process, tell you what to expect, in particular in that building, go through your board package with you, because inevitably there is always something that needs to be corrected, because it's just a lot of paperwork and it's a very tedious process. So when we're on the listing side and we represent the seller, then even once the buyer's agent has completed their board package, we still review it to see if there's anything else that we think could be presented better. Co-ops will often ask for an intro letter, even if they don't. We usually tell people to include an intro letter. That's just sharing a little bit about yourself, the intent for the apartment, and what drew you to the apartment and the building in general. Everybody has a lot of pride in their home, and the board especially has put so much effort into things like the lobby, the roof deck, the super, the staff does as well. So, take some of these things into consideration too when you realize that you're speaking to the individuals that have really made the building what it was that attracted you. One of the other things that they will sometimes ask for So don't be afraid of the co-op board package process. Just make sure you have the proper help to go through it. Some other things to consider are, if you're not a W-2 employee, they very often will want a CPA letter. But again, these are things that we will walk you through and we'll hold your hand through the entire process. Try to think of what, there's something else I want to say here. You might also want to know how long the co-op board package process takes. So think of the timeline like this, and this is obviously a hypothetical situation because each building could be a little bit different. So you submit an offer, you get an accepted offer. Once you have an accepted offer, a deal sheet goes out. Once a deal sheet goes out, the attorney on the seller side can prepare the contract. Then the buyer attorney and the seller attorney negotiate that contract. Once they negotiate the contract, you're able to sign as long as the due diligence seems okay. So during this process of contract negotiations, the buyer's attorney is also responsible for doing due diligence on the building. Some of the items that we on the listing side send to the buyer's agent's attorney, or the buyer's attorney, some of the things that we send to the buyer's attorney are the offering plan, any amendments, house rules, the last 2 years of financials, any recent information or memos about capital improvements, assessments, anything they need to know about contacting the management company. That also goes on the deal sheet typically too. So we try to supply them with as much information up front, and then obviously anything additional we will help them try to get from the management company. Very often they also like to look at budgets, this year's budget, last year's budget, and part of that is because the financials for the previous year often don't come out till the summer. So it can be 6 months in before you actually get to see what those financials were for the last year. So the budgets can help. And your attorney is also going to have a questionnaire that they send to the management company. This is a different questionnaire than the questionnaire that your lender has, and they will send to the management company for your loan, and they can use a generic questionnaire, they can customize the questionnaire. So you would have a conversation with your attorney making sure that all the questions you have are getting answered, again, prior to you signing the contract. When you sign the contract, you'll send the deposit. The deposit here is typically around 10%, and that goes into escrow. So the deposit is held until the closing, where then if you're, say, paying 20% down, you're going to have to come up with the remainder of that money in order to be able to close the deal. So the timing, to go back to that, once you submit a board package, and typically it's about 2 weeks that you have to submit a board package, but once you submit the board package, then it can take easily a minimum of a month for the review and the interview process. This can also take more depending on the co-op and how they handle things. Do they require that they review the package all together at a meeting? Will they review it as, they receive packages? So again, this is going to vary from building to building. So think of it in terms of regarding the minimum of the 1 month, that it will be with the management company for about a week. It could take, a week at least for the board to look, or likely more. Then the board, if they don't have any other questions or need any additional information, they're going to have to invite you for an interview. Now, the board members are volunteers, so the interviews are going to be scheduled based on what their availability is. So the interview could be in a week, it could be in a few days, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month. You just don't know. So there's a lot of variables with that. And obviously during holidays, during the summer, that's when things can take even longer than normal. Once you have your interview, depending on the building, some people will find out the next day, some people will find out in a few days, a week. Sometimes they need to meet after the interview to discuss. But in general, what you need to know is that the board is going to vote, and then they're going to respond to the management company once they've voted. So the management company will then be responsible for sharing the result with the agents, the attorneys, the seller, the buyer, and so on, everyone basically involved in that transaction. When the management company shares that information, it could easily take a couple of weeks for you to be able to get a closing schedule. Now, here in the city, you're going to need to have your attorney schedule with the management company. Sometimes there are closings that take place outside of the management companies, but very often they take place in the management company's office. The attorneys will schedule this. It depends on the availability of the management company. But know that after you get, say, your approval, hopefully, that then the management company has to prepare these closing docs that they're going to send to the board to be signed off on. Once they get those closing docs back is when you can truly prepare for the close. Now, depending on your lender, it may take them a little time to be able to clear to close is what we call it. So you'll want to be in communication with them. Otherwise, again, your attorney will really kind of run the show at this point and try to make sure that everything gets done in the time frame that works for all parties. So there's a lot of variables, but typically we will say about 60 days to 90 days on the financing side. If you're cash with a co-op, I would still say a minimum of 45 days, but very likely it could end up being around 60 days pending how the co-op operates with their approval process. So, and I know I brought up escrow earlier today. It's a whole other conversation. Sometimes a co-op could require escrow, and that means that they might want someone to put money in escrow that's held with the co-op. Their attorney prepares all of this stuff. So the attorney holds on to this in escrow until either the co-op has decided to release those funds and has had an agreement with that buyer or current shareholder, or sometimes it can be until the apartment is sold. So this also will vary, and it could be that the co-op's trying to work with someone who has either less post-closing liquidity than they'd like, a higher debt-to-income ratio than they would like, any kind of instability that makes the co-op nervous. And keep in mind that the reason that they do this is ultimately to protect the shareholders. So as a buyer, when you're getting annoyed about them asking you for more information, the process potentially taking a little bit longer with an additional review, once you are a shareholder in that building, they're trying to protect your asset at the end of the day, and you're going to be happy that that's their process. So contact us, any questions, Celeste Pandy, we're here to help.